The Xalrith were a strange, misunderstood race. They lived far beyond the reach of most known civilizations in the galaxy, hidden away on a small, distant planet. Their appearance, with their pale green skin and multiple eyes, made them unappealing to other species. Their bodies, built for strength and endurance, did not match the elegant, graceful forms that other species preferred. The Xalrith weren't like the smooth-skinned, beautiful creatures that filled the stars, and for that, they had been ignored. In the vastness of space, beauty and charm often meant survival, and those who did not possess these traits were often left to fend for themselves. The Xalrith had tried to join the galactic community countless times, sending out requests for aid, hoping for alliances or trade agreements. But each time, their messages were met with silence, or worse, mockery. The stars in the sky seemed to reject them, as though they were not worthy of being noticed. Humanity, on the other hand, had only recently made its mark among the stars. Earth's first steps into the galaxy had been cautious but optimistic. Humans had sent out ships, eager to explore and make new friends in the vastness of space. They had encountered other species, each one different and exciting in its own way. But the Xalrith were different. Humanity had not ignored them. Instead, humanity saw something in them, something worth helping, worth protecting. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Jensen was one of the first humans to be sent to the Xalrith homeworld. A seasoned diplomat, she had always believed in the power of understanding and empathy. The reports from Earth's space agencies had been troubling. The Xalrith were struggling, their planet falling into disrepair. Their technology, once ahead of its time, was now decaying. The Xalrith had tried to trade their knowledge for food and resources, but no one had taken them seriously. Sarah's mission was simple: investigate their situation, assess the situation, and, if possible, offer help. She was traveling on a human exploration vessel, the Pioneer, which had just entered the Xalrith star system. As they neared the planet, Sarah couldn't help but feel a strange mix of excitement and sorrow. She had heard stories of the Xalrith's efforts to connect with the galactic community. She knew they were not the warmest or most welcoming species, but surely they deserved a chance. The Xalrith planet, once a beautiful world with lush forests and vast oceans, was now a shadow of its former self. Thick clouds covered the skies, and the air felt heavy with a sense of abandonment. As the Pioneer descended toward the surface, Sarah looked out the window, taking in the alien landscape. Her heart sank. The Xalrith were in more trouble than anyone could have imagined. Sarah stepped off the ship, meeting the alien delegation that had been waiting for them. There was no grand welcome, no warm embrace. Instead, the Xalrith looked tired, worn out from years of struggle. One of them, a tall figure with 6 eyes, stepped forward and spoke with a heavy, almost desperate voice. "We are the Xalrith," the figure said, "and we have been forgotten by the stars. Will you remember us, human?" Sarah's heart felt a tight pang of sympathy. This was not just about diplomacy or political alliances. This was about giving hope to a species that had long been rejected. Humanity, for all its flaws, could do better. And she, for one, would make sure they did. As Sarah stepped onto the surface of the Xalrith homeworld, the weight of their desperation settled in her chest. The air was thick and smelled of decay, a clear sign that the planet had once been vibrant, but now lay in the grips of slow destruction. The trees were withered, their branches barely clinging to life, and the oceans that once sparkled with clear waters now seemed dark and turbulent. It was a sad sight, and Sarah couldn't help but feel a deep sense of sorrow for the Xalrith. The delegation led her through the barren landscape toward their capital city. The streets were empty, and the buildings, though still standing, showed signs of wear and neglect. The Xalrith had once been a proud and technologically advanced species, but now they seemed like a shell of what they had been. Their once grand cities were now quiet and forgotten, just like their cries for help. Sarah noticed that Xalrith who accompanied her were not as strong or confident as she had imagined. There was a quiet sadness in their eyes, a sense of defeat that only someone who had been rejected by the stars could understand. They were not asking for pity, but they were desperate for something, anything, to save them from the slow death their species was facing. One Salrith, a tall figure with long, silver skin, turned to Sarah and spoke. "Our people have been trying for centuries to join the galactic community, but every time, we are turned away. No one will help us. We have the knowledge, the technology, but we lack the resources. Our planet is dying, and we don't know where to turn." Sarah felt the weight of those words. The Salrith had tried everything they could to save themselves, but no one had ever given them a chance. They had reached out to other civilizations, only to be met with rejection. Their technology, though advanced, was not enough to overcome the natural disasters ravaging their planet. Karza, the Salrith leader who had spoken earlier, led Sarah to a large open space where a group of scientists and engineers had gathered. They showed her their most recent inventions, machines that could purify the air, extract water from the dying oceans, and even restore the soil to its fertile state. But all of these innovations required materials that they no longer had access to. Their resources were running low, and without help, their attempts would fail. Sarah listened intently, studying the machines and the plans that the Salrith had put together. Their technology was impressive, but without the necessary resources, it would never work. She could see the fear in their eyes. They were on the brink of extinction, and they knew it. They had nowhere else to turn. Their future was bleak, and they needed help, not just to survive, but to thrive. For a moment, Sarah stood silently, processing everything she had seen. She had come here to help, but this was more than just a diplomatic mission. It was a chance to make a difference, something bigger than any treaty or alliance. Humanity had the power to change the course of the Salrith's fate, and Sarah knew, deep in her heart, that this was the right thing to do. She turned to Karza and spoke softly. "We can help you. Humanity may not have all the answers, but together, we can save your people." Karza's eyes glowed faintly, as if a spark of hope had been reignited. "Do you truly believe that, human?" Sarah nodded firmly. "Yes, I do. We will not turn our backs on you." The Salrith, once rejected by all, had found a new ally in humanity. But the road ahead would not be easy. There were many obstacles to overcome, and the galaxy would not simply accept this new alliance. But Sarah was determined to see it through, for the Salrith and for humanity. The stars might have ignored them, but Sarah was ready to extend a hand. Back on Earth, the news of humanity's decision to aid the Salrith spread quickly. The United Nations, the governing body of Earth's space exploration, held an emergency session. The room buzzed with debate as representatives from different nations argued about what was best for Earth. Some supported the decision, believing it was the right thing to do, while others were more cautious. They feared that helping the Salrith could lead to trouble, especially when so many other alien species had refused to even acknowledge them. Sarah Jensen, the human diplomat who had traveled to the Salrith homeworld, sat quietly in the back of the room, listening to the arguments. She knew that this was more than just a political decision. It was a test of humanity's character. If Earth refused to help the Salrith, it would send a message that humanity was just as heartless as the other galactic species. But if Earth decided to extend a hand, it would show that humanity was willing to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult. One representative, a woman from China, stood up and spoke with strong conviction. "We must not turn our backs on the Salrith. They have been rejected by the stars, but they have valuable knowledge and technology. We have the power to help them, and in return, we may gain allies who will respect us for our compassion." Another voice, this time from a European representative, spoke with caution. "We must be careful. The Salrith have been rejected by other civilizations for a reason. What if they are not trustworthy? What if their technology is dangerous, or they have hidden motives?" The debate grew heated, with emotions running high, but Sarah, having spent time on the Salrith homeworld, knew the answer. She had seen their struggle firsthand. She had seen the pain in their eyes and the hope that flickered whenever they spoke of their desire for peace and cooperation. They were not perfect, but neither was humanity. She believed they deserved a chance. Finally, the President of the United Nations, a calm and wise leader, stood up to speak. We must consider what kind of future we want to create. A future where we ignore the suffering of others, or one where we extend a hand, even to those who have been rejected by the stars. There was a long silence in the room. The representatives looked at one another, thinking carefully about the choice before them. After what seemed like an eternity, the vote was called. One by one, the nations cast their votes. The result was clear. Humanity had chosen to help the Xalrith. The decision was not without its risks, but it was a choice driven by hope, by the belief that compassion could change the course of history. The Xalrith were not just a dying species. They were an opportunity for humanity to show the galaxy that it was capable of more than just survival. It was capable of kindness. As the meeting adjourned, Sarah felt a sense of pride. Humanity had made its choice. They would not turn their backs on those in need, no matter how different or misunderstood they were. It was a decision that would shape the future, not just for Earth, but for the Xalrith as well. Back on the Xalrith homeworld, Sarah sent the message: humanity will stand by your side. Karza, the Xalrith leader, read the message with a mixture of relief and disbelief. After centuries of rejection, the Xalrith had finally found an ally in humanity. The stars had ignored them, but they were no longer alone. The atmosphere on the Xalrith homeworld had changed overnight. There was a sense of hope in the air, a feeling that something important was about to happen. Sarah Jensen and the human delegation had arrived with the resources and knowledge that could change the fate of the Xalrith. They had come not just to offer help, but to show the Xalrith that they were not alone anymore. The Xalrith capital, once a bustling center of culture and technology, had been reduced to a shadow of its former self. Streets were empty, and many buildings lay abandoned or in disrepair. Yet there was still beauty in the ruins. The designs of the Xalrith had been sophisticated, and even in their current state, their city held a quiet, timeless elegance. Sarah walked through the city, accompanied by Karza, the leader of the Xalrith, and other members of the alien delegation. Karza's eyes glowed faintly, a sign of his people's deep connection to their planet. Despite the destruction around them, there was a quiet strength in his voice as he spoke. We once thought that we could solve our problems alone, Karza said, his voice heavy with regret. We built this city, these machines, believing that technology would save us. But now we see that we need more than just technology. We need hope. We need allies. Sarah nodded, understanding his words more than he knew. Humanity had faced its own struggles, its own failures, but the one thing humanity had always had was the ability to persevere, to keep going when it seemed like all was lost. And now, humanity was offering that same strength to the Xalrith. We're here to help, Karza, Sarah said with confidence. Together, we can rebuild. We can restore what was lost. As they walked through the city, Sarah's team began to unpack their supplies. The Xalrith watched in awe as humans brought out advanced machines that could purify the air, restore water to the dry rivers, and help regenerate the soil. It wasn't just the technology that caught their attention, but the human spirit. They saw the determination in the faces of the humans, the willingness to put everything they had into making a difference. Karza turned to Sarah. You have given us hope, but will your people truly stand by us? Will you help us rebuild, even when it seems impossible? Sarah met his gaze, her voice steady. Humanity doesn't give up, Karza. We won't leave you behind. We're in this together. The first days of cooperation were difficult. The Xalrith had their own ways of doing things, and humanity's methods weren't always a perfect fit. But both sides were patient, learning from one another. The Xalrith taught the humans how to adapt to their planet's unique environment, and the humans shared their knowledge of sustainable technology and infrastructure. Over time, the human presence began to make a difference. The air quality improved, the rivers slowly started to flow again, and new crops began to grow in the once barren soil. But more than that, there was a shift in the Salrith people. They began to believe in their future again. They saw the potential for growth, not just as a species, but as a part of a larger galactic community. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, Karza stood next to Sarah, looking out at the progress they had made together. "You were right, human," Karza said softly. "There is more to life than survival. There is hope, and together we will find our place among the stars." Sarah smiled. She knew this was just the beginning, but it was a beginning that would change everything for both the Salrith and humanity. The days following the arrival of the human aid were filled with hard work. The Salrith people, once resigned to their fate, now worked side by side with the humans, rebuilding their world. The machines brought by the humans had begun to work wonders, purifying the air and restoring the soil. For the first time in years, the Salrith could breathe easier, their planet's future no longer hanging by a fragile thread. But just as hope began to grow, a new threat appeared. Sarah and Karza stood on a high platform overlooking the city when the news came. The Edrath, a ruthless species known for their greed and aggression, had entered the Salrith star system. They had already attacked several nearby planets, and now they were headed toward Salrith's homeworld, eager to claim the planet's resources for themselves. The Edrath were a terrifying sight. Their dark, insect-like bodies towered over most other species, and their technology was highly advanced. They had been a menace to countless civilizations, and now they were targeting the Salrith. For years, the Salrith had tried to fend off invaders on their own, but with their planet in ruins, they had little strength left to defend themselves. Sarah looked at Karza, his face lined with worry. She could see the fear in his eyes, and she knew he feared the same thing she did. The Salrith would not survive another attack. "What do we do?" Karza asked, his voice low. "We don't have the strength to fight them off. They will destroy everything we've rebuilt." Sarah took a deep breath. She had seen the power of the Salrith's technology, but she also knew that fighting the Edrath would require more than just machines. The Salrith might be physically strong, but their true strength lay in their resilience, their ability to adapt and survive against all odds. It was time for them to show the galaxy what they were really made of. "We fight together," Sarah said firmly. "The humans have experience with the Edrath. We'll help you defend your planet, but we need your people to stand with us." Karza hesitated, then nodded slowly. He knew that this would be their only chance. They couldn't afford to back down. The following days were a blur of planning and preparation. The Salrith and humans worked together, pooling their knowledge and resources. Humans taught the Salrith how to strengthen their defenses, how to use their own technology in new ways. The Salrith, in turn, shared their expertise in guerrilla tactics and their knowledge of the terrain. Their planet's forests, mountains, and caves offered perfect hiding spots, and they knew how to use the environment to their advantage. When the Edrath finally arrived, they were met with fierce resistance. At first, the battle seemed hopeless. The Edrath ships filled the skies, their weapons raining down on the Salrith cities. But the humans and the Salrith fought back with everything they had. The Salrith's strength in battle, combined with the humans' advanced technology and strategy, made the difference. In the heart of the battle, Sarah fought alongside Karza. Together, they led the charge against the Edrath forces, using the Salrith's terrain to their advantage. It was a brutal fight, but the Salrith proved their true strength, not just in their technology or their weapons, but in their spirit. They had been ignored for so long, but now they were showing the galaxy that they could fight, and they could win. By the time the Edrath retreated, the Salrith had proven themselves as a force to be reckoned with. They had fought for their planet, for their future, and for the humans who had helped them when no one else would. As the dust settled, Karza stood next to Sarah, looking out over the battlefield. The Salrith had won, but the victory was not just theirs. It was a victory for humanity too, a reminder that strength comes in many forms, and together they had shown that they were stronger than the stars ever realized. The victory over the Edrath was a turning point. The Xalrith, once seen as weak and unworthy of attention, had proven themselves as fierce fighters, capable of defending their planet and their future. Humanity had fought beside them, and together they had pushed the Edrath back. But the battle had taken a toll on both sides. Cities had been damaged, and lives had been lost. Yet there was a sense of accomplishment in the air. The Xalrith and humans had stood together, and they had won. Sarah and Karza stood on a hill overlooking the city, watching as the Xalrith began to rebuild. The damage was clear, but there was no fear in their eyes. They had fought, they had survived, and now they were determined to rebuild stronger than ever. "We did it," Sarah said quietly, her voice filled with a mix of exhaustion and pride. Karza nodded, his face still tense from the battle. "We fought for our planet, for our future, and with your help we won. I never thought I'd see the day when the Xalrith would have allies, not just enemies." Sarah smiled softly. She knew what Karza meant. For so long, the Xalrith had been rejected by the galaxy, abandoned by the very stars they had tried to reach. But now, they had found a true ally in humanity. This alliance was more than just about survival. It was about something greater: trust, understanding, and a shared belief in the power of cooperation. "It's not just about the fight, Karza," Sarah said. "It's about what comes next. This is the beginning of something new. Together, we can help your people thrive again. The galaxy won't ignore you anymore." Karza looked at her, his expression softening. "I never thought I would hear those words. Humanity's decision to help us. It's more than I could have ever hoped for." As the days passed, the alliance between humanity and the Xalrith grew stronger. The human presence on the planet was not just about aid and technology. It was about building trust, about forging relationships. Human scientists worked alongside Xalrith engineers to rebuild their cities, while diplomats like Sarah worked to ensure that the cooperation between their people remained strong. But not everyone was happy about this new alliance. The galactic community had always rejected the Xalrith, and their sudden partnership with humanity raised suspicions. Many species, especially those who had once mocked the Xalrith, watched the growing alliance with concern. The Edrath, having retreated, were likely to regroup and try again. And there were others who feared the rise of a new power in the galaxy. Sarah knew that their victory would not go unnoticed. There would be challenges ahead, and not just from outside forces. Some factions within the Xalrith would be resistant to the changes. There were those who still remembered the old ways, the ways of isolation and self-reliance. They would not easily trust humanity, no matter how much help they had provided. Karza knew this as well. There would be those among his people who would view the alliance with suspicion. Change was never easy, especially for a species that had been rejected for so long. But he believed, as Sarah did, that this was the only way forward. The future of the Xalrith depended on it. As they walked through the streets of the rebuilt city, Karza turned to Sarah. "I will do everything I can to ensure our people understand the importance of this alliance. It won't be easy, but we must be united. Together, we can face whatever comes next." Sarah nodded. "We've proven that we can do this together, and I believe we will continue to prove it, no matter what." The alliance between humanity and the Xalrith was still in its early stages, but it was already stronger than anything either species had ever known. The challenges ahead were uncertain, but Sarah and Karza both knew one thing for sure. Together, they were no longer weak. Together, they were a force the galaxy would have to reckon with. The battle had been won, but the aftermath was not as peaceful as Sarah had hoped. The Edrath had retreated, but their defeat wasn't the end of the threat. They were a proud and ruthless species, and Sarah knew they would be back. However, the bigger challenge now came from within the galaxy. The alliance between humanity and the Xalrith was drawing attention, and not all of it was positive. Galactic leaders had watched the unexpected partnership grow, and many were unsettled by the sudden rise of a united front between two species who had once been on the fringe of galactic affairs. To some, it was an opportunity. An alliance between the Tsalrith's ancient technology and humanity's resourcefulness seemed like something worth supporting. But to others, it was a dangerous precedent, something that threatened the established order. Sarah had known this would happen. No alliance in the galaxy went unchallenged. As humanity and the Tsalrith worked to rebuild the planet, Sarah received a series of messages from Earth warning of growing opposition. Certain factions wanted to distance themselves from the Tsalrith, fearing that their new allies might bring more trouble than they were worth. Some governments worried that the Tsalrith's past failures might turn into a long-term burden. But the most troubling message came from a high-ranking diplomat on Earth. The galaxy is watching. The Tsalrith have been rejected for centuries, and no one believes they can be trusted. There are many who are already questioning the wisdom of your mission. The weight of those words hung over Sarah like a dark cloud. She had believed in the Tsalrith and the strength of their new alliance with humanity, but now she wasn't sure if the galaxy was ready to accept them. She knew she couldn't back down, but the pressure was building. The alliance was still new, and it was fragile. One wrong move could unravel everything they had worked so hard to achieve. Meanwhile, on the Tsalrith homeworld, Karza had his own set of challenges. The war had left its scars not just on the planet, but on the Tsalrith people. While many of his people were grateful for humanity's help, others were wary of being so closely tied to a species that had only recently arrived on the galactic stage. Some believed that the Tsalrith should have fought their own battles, that depending on humans made them weak. Karza met with his council, speaking to them with urgency. We have a choice to make. We can either stand with humanity and prove that we can rise from the ashes, or we can push them away and continue to struggle alone. I will not let our people fall back into the shadows. We must show the galaxy that we are strong, and we will not be pushed aside again. The council murmured among themselves, the weight of the decision heavy on their minds. It wasn't just about trust in humanity. It was about reclaiming their place in the galaxy. The Tsalrith had been ignored for so long, but now they had a chance to be heard, to show their true potential. Sarah and Karza's paths seemed to be running parallel, both facing resistance from within their own people and from the larger galactic community. But both knew that there was no turning back now. They had made a commitment, not just to each other, but to the future. Days later, as Sarah walked through the Tsalrith capital, she saw the first signs of change. More Tsalrith were stepping forward, offering their assistance, and the once skeptical citizens began to support the rebuilding efforts. It wasn't easy, but it was a start. The question now was whether the galaxy would accept the Tsalrith as part of the future, or if they would remain in the shadows, as they had been for so long. Sarah was more determined than ever. She would not let the Tsalrith be forgotten again. Together, humanity and the Tsalrith had proven that they could be more than just survivors. They could be leaders, and they would not be silenced by fear. The days after the victory over the Edrath were filled with both hope and tension. On the Tsalrith homeworld, the rebuilding efforts were in full swing. The humans had stayed, working alongside the Tsalrith to restore the planet to its former glory. Together, they had already started to repair the damaged cities, clean the polluted air, and bring the rivers back to life. But despite all the progress, Sarah knew that the hardest part was still ahead. The real battle wasn't just against outside threats. It was the battle to prove to the galaxy that the Tsalrith deserved a place among the stars. Humanity's decision to help had already drawn attention. Some of the more peaceful galactic races were curious, while others were uneasy. The Tsalrith had been rejected for so long that the idea of them becoming a true galactic power was difficult to accept, and there were still many who doubted the wisdom of humanity's involvement. Was the alliance with the Tsalrith a sign of strength, or a mistake waiting to happen? Sarah sat in a small office overlooking the city, reading through the latest reports from Earth. The news was mostly positive. More countries were expressing support for the alliance, and there was talk of future trade agreements and cultural exchanges. But there were also voices of concern. Some were questioning whether humanity had made the right choice. They feared the risks of taking sides with a species so long ignored. Some even argued that the Xalrith had simply been lucky to have the humans at their side. But Sarah refused to let doubt cloud her judgment. She had seen the strength of the Xalrith firsthand. She had watched them fight for their planet, their future, and now it was time to give them the chance they deserved. This was no longer just a diplomatic mission. It was a chance to change the way the galaxy saw humanity and the Xalrith. Karza had been busy too, meeting with his own people and working to unite them. The Xalrith had always been a proud people, but many had been scared by the years of rejection. It would take time to rebuild trust, both in themselves and in their new allies. But Karza believed that together, they could accomplish anything. One evening, as Sarah walked through the bustling streets of the Xalrith capital, she saw the change in the air. The people were no longer afraid to speak up. They weren't just rebuilding their homes, they were rebuilding their hope. They no longer felt like outcasts in the galaxy. They were starting to see themselves as part of something greater. The humans had offered more than just technology and resources. They had given the Xalrith something even more valuable: a chance to belong. As Sarah met with Karza, she could sense the pride in his voice. "We've come a long way," he said, his 6 eyes gleaming with determination. "But this is just the beginning. There's so much more to do, and now we have the chance to do it." Sarah nodded, her heart full of hope. "And we'll do it together. We've already proven that we're stronger as allies." Karza smiled, the weight of his worries lifting. He had always believed that his people had much to offer the galaxy, but now he saw the truth. They had much to offer each other. Humanity and the Xalrith were no longer strangers. They were partners, bound by the hope of a better future. The galaxy had ignored the Xalrith for too long. But now, thanks to the unwavering strength of humanity, the Xalrith had a voice, and they were ready to be heard. As Sarah looked out at the horizon, she knew this was just the beginning of a new era, not just for the Xalrith, but for all of humanity. Together, they had shown that even the most rejected species could rise above their past, and that no one was truly alone in the universe. The Xalrith and humanity had come a long way since the battle with the Edrath. Their alliance had survived its first test, and together, they had begun to rebuild what was once lost. The planet was healing, the cities were growing, and there was a newfound sense of hope in the air. But Sarah knew the hardest part was yet to come. The galaxy was not as kind as the Xalrith's new allies had hoped. The galactic community, ever suspicious of change, was beginning to stir. Some races saw the alliance between humanity and the Xalrith as a challenge to the existing order. Others saw it as an opportunity to use the newfound partnership for their own gain. Some still held deep prejudices against the Xalrith, unwilling to forgive their past mistakes or to accept the idea that they could rise to power. It would take time for the galaxy to adjust to this new reality. Sarah sat in a small meeting room, reading reports from Earth and the larger galactic council. There were whispers in the corridors of power, whispers of sabotage, of attempts to undermine the fragile peace that had been forged. Some members of the Galactic Council were already calling for sanctions against the Xalrith, accusing them of being a threat to galactic stability. But Sarah was not one to give up easily. She had seen firsthand how the Xalrith had fought for their future. She knew that the alliance was not just about technology or power. It was about trust, about two species working together for a common goal. She could not let the fear and prejudice of others tear that apart. As Sarah walked through the bustling streets of the Xalrith capital, she couldn't help but notice the shift in the air. There was a quiet tension among the people. Many of them were hopeful, but some were afraid. They had spent so long in the shadows, rejected by the galaxy, that they feared this newfound attention might bring even more danger. Karza, too, was struggling with the pressure. Though he had rallied his people in the past, he now found himself caught between the desire to prove the Xalrith's worth and the fear of what the galaxy might do to them. He had made it clear that the Xalrith would not back down, but he knew that maintaining the alliance with humanity was crucial. "We've faced so many challenges, Sarah," Karza said one evening as they sat together in the heart of the city. "But now it feels like the hardest one is yet to come. The galaxy is watching, and I fear they will never accept us fully." Sarah understood his worry. It wasn't just about winning battles or rebuilding cities. It was about changing the way the galaxy viewed them. The Xalrith had to prove that they could be trusted, that they had something to offer beyond their past mistakes, and humanity had to prove that they weren't just trying to gain power or influence, but that they genuinely believed in the Xalrith's future. "We knew this wouldn't be easy," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "But we've come this far, Karza, and we will keep fighting for this alliance, not just for us, but for the future of all those who have been forgotten by the stars." The Xalrith's future was uncertain, and the galaxy's response remained unclear. But one thing was certain: the bond between humanity and the Xalrith was unbreakable. Together, they had already overcome so much, and with each passing day, the galaxy's rejection seemed less powerful against the strength of their shared resolve. Sarah looked at Karza, seeing the fire of determination in his eyes. No matter what the galaxy threw at them, she knew they would face it together. Months had passed since the Edrath were defeated, and the Xalrith homeworld was now a place of rebuilding, not just physically but emotionally. The skies were clearer, the rivers ran fresher, and the once barren fields were now lush with crops. The people of the Xalrith had worked hard alongside humanity, and the results spoke for themselves. Yet, even as progress bloomed, the galaxy remained uneasy, watching from the shadows, unsure whether this new alliance would hold. Sarah knew that this uneasy peace was only the beginning. Despite the many successes, there were still voices in the Galactic Council who opposed the partnership between humanity and the Xalrith. There were still those who believed the Xalrith didn't belong, that they were still too unpredictable, too dangerous. And while humanity had firmly decided to stand with them, the rest of the galaxy had yet to accept the idea of a united humanity-Xalrith force. Sarah had spent countless hours in meetings, trying to persuade those who doubted the alliance. She had shared the stories of the Xalrith's strength and resilience, of how they had fought side by side with humans to secure their future. She had shown that the Xalrith were more than the mistakes of their past. They were a proud species with the potential to be a valuable ally, not just for humanity, but for the galaxy as a whole. One evening, as Sarah walked through the heart of the Xalrith capital, she was struck by the sight of so many people, both human and Xalrith, working together. She had seen it from the beginning, the human ingenuity mixed with the Xalrith's technological advancements. It was a partnership like no other. They were building something new, something that could change the galaxy. And no matter how many voices from the past tried to resist it, the bond between the two species was real and unbreakable. Sarah met with Karza on the city's central platform, overlooking the horizon. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, casting a soft glow over the streets below. Karza's 6 eyes gleamed with pride, his shoulders relaxed for the first time in months. The burden he had carried for so long, the burden of trying to prove his people's worth to a galaxy that had rejected them, seemed to have lifted. "We've done it, Sarah," Karza said, his voice filled with emotion. "We've rebuilt more than just our world. We've rebuilt our place in the universe." Sarah smiled, looking out at the city. "It's not just you, Karza. Humanity's been by your side every step of the way. This is our future now, too. We've learned from each other, and we've grown stronger because of it." The two stood in silence for a moment, both feeling the weight of what they had accomplished. It had been a long journey, but the Xalrith were no longer a forgotten species. They had earned their place in the stars, not through conquest or violence, but through resilience, hard work, and the willingness to believe in the potential of others. Far beyond the borders of their planet, word was spreading. More species were beginning to take notice, not just of the Xalrith, but of the partnership between humanity and the Salrith. Some of the more peaceful races began to open up, eager to learn from the united front that had emerged. There were still those who opposed the idea, but their voices were growing quieter. As Sarah looked out at the horizon, she knew that this alliance was more than just about survival. It was a statement to the galaxy that no one, no matter how long they had been rejected, should be forgotten. The legacy of this partnership would echo through the stars, and in time, the galaxy would learn that unity was stronger than division, and that compassion could build a future where all species had a chance to thrive. Sarah looked at Karza, her heart full of hope. This is just the beginning. Together, we can show the galaxy what true strength is. Karza nodded, a smile spreading across his face. And together, we will make sure that the stars never forget us again.